this is our data. Because, of course, GRI is one of the framework used by companies to disclose sustainability information. But you will see here that, well, we were founded in 1997, so we are quite a young organization. We were founded in the US by the United Nations Environment Program and series. And we started with our framework, with the first edition of the GRI guidelines in the 99. And we started only with 11 companies. Now, you see, in the last decade, well, more than a decade, we have now some almost, 3,000 companies around the world that report. But this data is not complete. Why? GRI offers its framework as a free public good. You can download it. It's for free. And our challenge is that we don't have a clear representation of how many companies are using it. So this data is only a fraction of what's happening out there in the world. There are many more companies that use GRI, and we're not aware of. You will see here, back to the KPMG study, that they looked about the reporting by region, and indeed, in the reporting by region, you will see that Asia Pacific had actually quite a steep increase from 2011, the violet column, and 2013, the blue column, from 49 to 71. Big increase. So it goes along the overall trend of increasing of sustainability reporting, but it's even more than the rest of the world. So it's amazing to see how Asia Pacific is catching up on this practice. This here we show about the use of GRI as the standard to disclose sustainability information. It analyzes 3 years, and if we focus on the last one, 2013, among the Global Fortune 250, 82% of companies use GRI as the standard, and among the N100, which are the top 100 companies of the countries analyzed by this study, 71% use GRI. Therefore, GRI represents the standard, the de facto standard for sustainability reporting. Okay, are there questions? I've gone through the first 3 chapters. Well, is there anything, any question? Oh, great, thank you.
Specific on why
I will repeat the question because the microphone was not working. The question was a bit more about investors. So why investors are interested in companies that do sustainability report. And the second question was on why climate change among those information. I think that the answer of the 2 questions is basically one. Investors, of course, want to invest in a company that performs well. In order to perform well, you have to, companies have to have in place risk management. And among the different risks in the past few years, we saw a steep increase of non-financial risks, which are the ESG risks, environmental crisis, social unrest, governance, internal governance of a company. And I don't want to name any case, but I'm sure that many of you have in mind some of the big scandals of the big crises. So why climate change? Because there is a huge pressure which is coming from the world we are living in on climate change. So adaptation to climate change is something that companies should look at and should have systems in place to prevent and mitigate the risks that will derive from climate change. But indeed, I can tell you in terms of topics, there is another very big topic, which is business and human rights. More and more, the tension on the business impacts on human rights has been increasing. And that's because Rana Plaza recently, well, already a couple of years ago, showed us that there is a potential negative impact of companies on business and human rights. What were the systems in place by the companies to monitor what were the labor conditions? Maybe there were none. And that's the challenge. Did I answer to your question? Cool. Any other questions so far? Okay, if not, I will just go on. And I will go on with the policy trends, right? Oh yeah, there it is. So, we've been experiencing at GRI that in many countries around the world, there were new policies put in place by governments, some new regulation, and we do an analysis which is called carrots and sticks. And it's an analysis about policy worldwide. We do this in collaboration with Stellenbosch University, South Africa, KPMG, and UNEP, the Environment Program of the United Nations. So here you can see that actually we found a steep increase of the number of policies and regulation in the countries that we analyze in our report. Now we have something like 120 different regulations. And among those, some 72% are mandatory. Others are voluntary initiatives, and there is a wide spectrum of the action that policymakers and market regulators can do on the topic of sustainability. But as a matter of fact, we saw a steep increase. We analyzed actually that one of the trends is the state-owned companies. So many state-owned companies are actually mandated to disclose sustainability information. That's because the link of the state. The state has the duty to, for example, to respect human rights. Therefore, even when the state acts as an economic actor, it still needs to respect human rights, and that's why sustainability reporting has been mandated to that extent. We saw as well, and this is to pay a tribute to the hosting organization, that sustainability reporting in stock exchanges has been increasing dramatically. Especially in this region, Southeast Asia, we actually see that stock exchange play a pivotal role, sometimes using the listing requirement, some other times raising awareness. It really depends on the market maturity. And it's really interesting to see the fact that stock exchanges are keeping up this role. There are many initiatives. One of the most important ones is this Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative, and I've understood today that recently SET became part of this very major global movement of the Sustainable Stock Exchange. Another interesting element that we can see here in this report is that there is a trend of policy initiatives that follows the so-called report or explain approach. And this is mainly because, like in corporate governance, it started with an invitation to companies to report, to do something about sustainability, to do a sustainability report, or explain why they don't do it. So it's a flexible approach that helps the companies to keep up and to start embarking in this new policy. Here you have an overview of the different countries in the world, and you will see in green the market regulators initiative, in violet the governmental initiative, and striped the both market regulators and government initiatives. You can see that there are many around the world. Some of them are yellow because they are on the go. So they are under the making. So they are really, the governments and market regulators is looking at that now. And you will see that there is a mixed approach, but the mixed approach between government and market regulators is kind of the trend that is currently, that we are currently expecting, and we will see this more and more. Another interesting thing is the references to GRI. So different regulators, policymakers are looking at what are the standards that companies can use. And we've been really pleased to see that in the world so far, in very different ways, some 23 countries are referring to the Global Reporting Initiative as the standard for sustainability reporting. And you will see here the list. Of course, Thailand is among the ones that recommends GRI, but you will see other, for example, I can just mention other approaches, which is, for example, in India, the GRI is referenced in the public enterprises guidance, or in South Africa is linked to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange listing requirement. In Sweden, it is actually mandated for state-owned companies to use GRI. So you see very different kind of approaches. But the interesting thing is that we are seeing momentum of referencing the standard. And that's something that we are hearing more and more and more. There is a need of a global standard for this. So we are offering the standard as a free public good. I thought it would have been interesting to bring you a story from Europe, which is the region where I am based. Recently, in April 2014, the European Parliament approved a directive which is applicable for all the 28 member states of the European Union. In this directive, they are increasingly asking companies, listed companies, to disclose sustainability information. They call it non-financial information. It's basically the same thing. And this has been quite a long negotiated directive. I can tell you that it has been very debated because, of course, they had to pull together 28 different countries. This will affect something like 6,000 companies in Europe. So we expect a steep increase of reporting from Europe. But I know already that other regions of the world are looking at this to try to understand how they can replicate and how they can level the playing field between the different regions. I mentioned several times the role of stock exchanges. And indeed, we are experiencing a steep increase of, role of stock exchanges. I've been saying it so many times today. In particular, we acknowledge the role of the World Federation of Exchanges and the Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative. Those are two very important initiatives. And recently, the World Federation of Exchanges started a working group on sustainability. They're now understanding, getting together the different stock exchanges to understand what they should do, how they could facilitate peer-to-peer learning from different stock exchanges. The Sustainable Stock Exchange Initiative is a UN-based platform, and it gathers many different stock exchanges around the world on the topic of sustainability. They will have soon in Geneva an annual meeting, and at the occasion of the World Investment Forum, which is with UNCTAD, from the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, they will discuss about how sustainability among the stock exchanges can help economic growth. And there are other different initiatives. You will see, climate risk from a series, and Aviva Investors is convening an investor coalition. A coalition of investors that are asking more sustainability information to make better decisions. Actually, the mention to the Aviva coalition helps me to bridge to this other topic, which is the future of sustainability reporting in the post-2015 development agenda. A coalition of investors during the Rio Plus 20 conference, the big conference that took place 20 years after Rio Summit in 1982. So in 2012, all head of states from all over the world convened in Rio to discuss what remains to be done in terms of sustainable development. And there, this coalition of investors called for a global treaty on sustainability reporting. Of course, this was too ambitious, but it's good. because it's pushing the line. And indeed, the coalition managed to achieve a paragraph in the Rio +20 outcome document that was about the encouragement by governments of sustainability reporting. This links to the post-2015 development agenda, because after Rio, there was a decision to create a working group on for the drafting of the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, that will take over from the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, that are going to expire in 2015. So from 2015 to 2030, there will be a set of goals that the governments set for themselves. What's the role of business there? This is something that the governments have been increasingly asking us, how to engage private sector. And of course, there are different tracks. One track is the accountability of private sector towards human rights, environmental issues. There is a track of financing sustainable development. There is a track of monitoring of the contribution of private sector to the overall sustainable development. And this is actually what was achieved in July. The Open Working Group, which was a group of governments that drafted the proposal for SDGs, this group came with a draft of 12 goals. And among those 12 goals, there was one sub-goal, which is called Target, on sustainability reporting. And it says that the governments encourage companies, especially large and transnational companies, to adopt sustainable practices and to integrate sustainability information into their reporting cycle. This is very actionable, because then, you really have a governmental commitment to help companies to do sustainability reporting. There are other elements where the role of the private sector has been taken in consideration. One is the chapeau, which is, just introduction, which is the vision of the governments about the fact that sustainable development includes private sector. Private sector is important in achieving sustainable development. And the other part is the means of implementation, which is, how can we implement all those goals? And in this, there is a role for multi-stakeholder partnerships, so the engagement between civil society, governments, companies, and there is as well the data monitoring and accountability, which is, of course, the challenging thing. Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, launched the so-called architecture, which is a joint project by World Business Council for Sustainable Development, GRI, and United Nations Global Compact. He launched this project, this alliance, that aims at building the so-called architecture of the private sector engagement into the post-2015 development agenda. How does it work? It's a bit, not really focused here. I can tell you very briefly that the idea is to build the role of the private sector in the SDGs, trying to understand, first of all, what are the commitments and what private sector can do to achieve sustainable development, monitoring, disclosing information, reporting, assessing what the impact is, and then try to understand what is the business case for companies to engage in this dialogue. So this is a very ambitious agenda that we are carrying together with those other two organizations. And the ambition is to have a clear framework for companies to disclose how they are impacting on the sustainable development goals. There we go to the GRI framework. I think I have still a bit of time. So, a bit about G4. It's a long journey. As I mentioned, we started in 1997. In the 2000s, we had a very simple set of guidelines that we reviewed in 2002. And we had at that point the G2 that was launched at Johannesburg during the World Summit on Sustainable Development. 2006, we launched G3 guidelines, and it became very much more structured, and from being a niche thing, started to become a bit more mainstream. We had G3.1, there was a small modification of the G3 on a couple of issues. And then we had the big launch of G4 in 2013. I will focus on the G4, of course, now, which is the current framework, and I will give you just an understanding of what it contains. Well, first of all, why we decided to do G4. And that was because of, even here, many different reasons. One of the things that we experienced was the need of further guidance on some topics, and I will show you which are the new topics under G4. We experienced as well the fact that many companies around the world were asking us to help them to start the process of the integration of financial and sustainability information. On the other side, we've heard many regulators and policymakers that were asking us a more robust, solid framework to reference as a standard. So those are some of the main reasons why we decided to go for G4. It was a long process, took a couple of years. We convened working groups, so we have many different actors from all over the world, so from all the regions of the world, all the constituencies that come together, and on a consensus basis, they come with the indicators. It was, as I mentioned, quite a long journey. And again, GRI, we're not the owners of the GRI framework. Everybody is the owner of the GRI framework. It is really built in a global effort, and we only facilitate the dialogue between the different regions and constituency. We had as well, aside the working groups, we had as well public comment periods. We actually had 2 public comment periods. Well, first one was primary survey, and then 2 public comment periods, where we gathered thousands of comments from around the world, and we pulled them together to make a robust G4. The structure is now this way. There are 2 main sections. There are actually 2 different PDF files or 2 different publications. The first one is the standard itself. It contains the reporting principles and the standard disclosures with all the indicators, all the principles, so that's actually the standard. The second one is an implementation guidance. So we decided to go this way to make clear what is the important part, which is the standard itself, the core part, and what companies and organizations can look at to get help to implement the guidance, and that's section number 2. So this was one of the points that were raised during the public comments, that they needed more user-friendly GRI guidelines, because usually it is perceived as a very thick document, very difficult to navigate. So we tried to overcome this challenge, making 2 different publications. I don't know whether you managed to see that. This is it's challenging even for me that I'm so close. This is a snapshot of all the categories that are in the GRI guidelines. You will see economic, environmental, and social category, which are the 3 main baskets. Under each basket, there are different aspects. For example, for the environmental category, we have materials, energy, water, biodiversity, emissions, compliance, transport. So all the different aspects which go really much to the topic. Under the social category, you see subcategories, because indeed social is pretty wide, it's pretty vast. And the subcategories are labor practice and decent work, human rights, community society, sorry, it's called society now, and product responsibilities. Under each subcategory, you have the topics. The ones with the red around are the elements that change in G4. So the others were already there, and some of those were already there before G4, but we revised the content of G4 for those categories. So one of the, well, we talked about that before, was climate change. Where it is? There it is. All the emission was one of the topics that we revised. So all the climate change related disclosures have been renewed in G4, but as well as anti-corruption in society, and we had an overall, revision of the human rights to make sure that we had the business and human rights guiding principles, the so-called John Ruggie framework, fully embedded in our guidelines, and much more. Under each disclosure item, under each aspect, there are some general standard disclosures and specific standard disclosure. That helps, again, the companies to go to very technical level to see exactly what is the general approach to one disclosure and what is the specific actions. And yeah, I will go back to that slide in a minute, but I wanted to first explain what is the main focus of GRI. And I've been discussing about this actually earlier with some of the colleagues at SET. And the main focus of G4, what we wanted to really change, was to give materiality the main role. And indeed, the focus is, how we say, what matters, where it matters. So the materiality is actually a concept that drives organization to select what are the most important topics, we call them aspects, that need to be reported on. And this is done on a double way. First of all, assessing the internal need of the company, and secondly, to reflect what are the needs of stakeholders. So actually, the materiality assessment is done understanding in a matrix where are the different aspects, for example, specific aspects about human rights, specific aspects about, waste or recycling. Where are they in this matrix according to two main directions, which is the influence on the stakeholder assessment, so what the stakeholders of the company have interest on, and the significance of the impacts for the companies. So the topics which are important both for the stakeholders and for the company itself, those are the material aspects that a company can disclose, and these are really the most important ones. I'm just checking the time. How much time I have more? I don't see another dot. 10? Okay, good. So, this is just an example of how the materiality works. This is an example about, for example, anti-corruption. And you will see here that there is in this graph the parent company, the organization as a whole, and the outside of the organization. For example, outside the organization there are suppliers. So a company should understand where the sustainability impact, well, the impact on anti-corruption happens. If this impact happens, like in this case, within the organization at the subsidiary level, then that is, hello? Yeah. Then that is the perimeter. So the company should disclose information that includes the subsidiary, because there the input is happening. In this other example, it's about child labor, and you will see here that actually the impacts that a company has assessed about child labor happen in the supplier. And this is why the materiality concept expands to the supply chain. In the supply chain, the input is happening. Sustainability reporting should cover the supply chain as well. That's why the focus is on what matters, so what are the aspects important for the stakeholder and for the company, and where matters. Supply chain, parent company. So it's a very elastic concept. This is another example where it's about emissions, and indeed here the input happens in the joint venture and in one of the other suppliers. So the materiality concept will cover the whole supply chain, including the joint venture. I will just skip on this. Okay, so I mentioned before, I showed you the squares around the topics that changed, but we did not change only topics, we changed